Hello and welcome to AUTOPROP's third iteration, or maybe I should say third reading of working with developers. That's a land assembly joke, everyone, so get it off to the right foot here. First of all, thank you everyone for coming out. We always maintain at AUTOPROP that we really love getting out amongst our customers and our potential customers and talking to you guys about what you do in your day-to-day workflows and how we can help you out, so thank you for coming. First of all, we'll get into the agenda here of what we're going to cover today. So the first thing is the welcome, which I'm sort of in the midst of. A little introduction on AUTOPROP, then my friend Troy here, and then we'll get into a couple of questions that we're going to ask Troy. And those are, how do you find sites and what do developers want from a realtor? So how can we help you guys produce a product that a developer will be enticed to purchase? Okay. So a few introductions here. Our service, first of all, AUTOPROP's been around. It was conceived about 4 years ago. It's been live for roughly 2 years, and what we offer is, unparalleled service, I would say, about knowing more and working faster. Okay, that translates into really nice, quick due diligence reports that have market analysis included in them, and it also covers visual data representation. Now, what does that mean? It means that we take information from all the GIS platforms, all the web maps, every city in the Lower Mainland, and we put it onto one platform for you guys. So it's easy to work with, and you know more, and you know it faster. The other thing we do, a big part of what we do, is generate new business, okay? We are a lead generation software. So we help you prospect, and ideally we help you make more money in your business, all right? The power of AUTOPROP, I would say, has been bolstered, I would say, a lot in the last little while when we've had our deal with the Greater Vancouver Real Estate Board, the Fraser Valley Real Estate Board as well. We can provide information from the MLS quicker and more easily, okay? Now, let's introduce our guest speaker today, Troy Abramaitis. Troy's been in the development industry for 14 years. The last 5 years of those have been at Bucci Developments. Okay, he has extensive real estate knowledge and education. He's helped facilitate the development of 19 multifamily land assemblies. He has also assembled over 400 lots, so there's some pretty big assemblies there, Troy. He has also acquired over $450 million in acquisitions. Okay, he's a licensed realtor in Vancouver, Calgary. He also has his managing broker's license, and he's the president of the Real Estate Institute of British Columbia. A little known fact there. So there you go. A little bit about Bucci. Bucci was established in 1953. They're a third-generation home builder. They operate in Calgary and Vancouver. They are currently developing over 2,000 homes in both those cities. Okay, so these are major players in the game. And they currently have a 70-unit project in Vancouver and a 400-unit acquisition in Fleetwood. They also have 2 major projects in Calgary underway currently. All right, great. Okay, so the next bit here is we're going to turn this over to Troy, and we're going to interview him. And Troy, we're going to ask you, how do developers find sites? And the first question that I have to ask you, Troy, is where do you start? If I have a listing, how do I assess if I should call you or any developer?
Well, mic check, okay. If a land realtor, commercial realtor brings us a site, typically we'll either receive a phone call or we'll receive an email or a package that outlines, I guess, the salient facts or the most important information, the size of the assembly, the price point, the zoning, what city it's in, and those type of details. Pricing and price per buildable square foot, I think, are very important. Sometimes you'll see price per door, which is another term that's used in valuing a property for development purposes. Price per door can be a bit of a misnomer versus price per buildable square foot, because if a door, being an apartment or a townhome or even a single-family building lot, is a really large unit or a really small unit, that can affect the price point. So if your townhome that you're proposing, say, per door is 2,000 square feet versus 1,100 square feet, that's going to skew the price per door. But at least on a price per buildable square foot, you'll know exactly how many square feet that site is based on its floor area ratio or floor space ratio. So when a realtor brings us a site, we evaluate it based on those criteria. We also consider, is the site zoned, is the site pre-zoned, or is the site going through a current neighborhood concept plan or neighborhood community plan. We're Gucci Developments, we're an active home builder, so from our perspective we like to get in and out as quickly as we can, and what I mean by that is through to the acquisition, the actual rezoning of the property if that's needed, development permit, building permit, finish construction, and then move our homeowners in. We're not a developer that land banks, so depending on the investor or the developer's criteria, they may be looking to hold land. They may be looking just to hold a smaller development site or a smaller assembly. Some developers work with different economies of scale, so that's something else that you need to consider too. But this is just getting back to the crux of the question, if a realtor brings us a site, we'll look very quickly at how much the overall acquisition cost is, what the rezoning timeline is or what the holding costs are, what type of terms and conditions we can get on the acquisition. And what I mean by that is it subject to first reading, is it subject to rezoning, can you get it subject to assembly, what is the feasibility or due diligence timeline that affects the overall due diligence period and the acquisition, and then finally how long are the sellers willing to hold it before they close. If on a recent acquisition that we had completed, we were able to get 4 months due diligence, and we were able to get a 1-year close. And we were willing to pay a premium for the properties because we were able to hold off on closing for 1 year. Time value of money being applied for us, I think was about $25,000 a month. We accrued that. So those are some of the factors we look at when somebody brings us a site.
Great, thank you. So zoning, OCP, lot size, buildable, some of the points to take away from there, yeah. How much do you work within existing plans versus how often do you try and propose amendments and changes to those OCP or NCP or local area plans?
The cities that we work in and also the NCPs, neighborhood concept plans, or the land use plans, depending on what the cities call them. Because every city has a different definition of NCP or land use plan or FSR, floor area ratio, or FAR. At the end of the day, we like working in existing communities that have certain criteria. So, for example, we like looking in Burquitlam. We like looking in Vancouver near the SkyTrain. We like looking in Richmond near the SkyTrain. We like looking in Burnaby near the SkyTrain. So I keep referencing the SkyTrain line. We like working in the downtown chorus of cities or in the inner city. If we're looking at sites that are outside of that scope, they're probably going to be a lesser density because in the city centers, that's the densest areas of these land use plans. So if you look at Metrotown, for example, they work on the Metrotown core, and then the further out you go from that plan, it's they call this is called transitional density. So you start with high rises, and then you'll look at mid rises that kind of encircle that main critical mass or critical point, and then you'll start the further you're away from there. You look 6-story, 4-story transitioning to townhomes, and then the single-family buffer is after that. So we like looking at the multifamily housing type being townhomes, apartments, mid-rises, and high-rises. And from our perspective, it doesn't necessarily matter if the site is in an existing NCP, an upcoming NCP that's currently going through the process, or is in an OCP, which is an official community plan that is not part of an NCP. As long as it has proximity to transit, it can be rezoned in a reasonable time frame, and there's existing development infrastructure around it, so you can tie into existing services. I think those are the main criteria we look at.
Fantastic answer, thank you very much. Here's a question for you that I think will save a little bit of brain damage in the long run. What are some red flags that disqualify a site?
If the site is heavily contaminated, that's one of the first things we'll look into. There's a contaminated sites registry that British Columbia has. Contaminated sites that exist, or potential contaminated sites may be red flagged on that. So that's one of the first things we'll check. If we're able to acquire a site and get it under contract, we work through the due diligence process. This includes an environmental phase 1, which there are consultants like Keystone Environmental, Next Environmental, and a number of other environmental companies. We'll hire them to do an environmental phase 1, which is basically a high-level synopsis of the property, what its past uses were, what the past uses were in the immediate neighborhood, and if there's any potential for contamination. We'll also do a geotechnical study. This affects the soils. If the soils are good, you can use a conventional shoring system or conventional construction methods to build. If the soils are very poor, that will affect the overall cost of construction because you're going to have to reinforce the site, so to speak, in terms of a geotechnical perspective. I'm sorry if some of the terminology I'm using may be new to you. We'll also hire an architect to complete a feasibility architectural study. So what that means is basically a site plan that shows what the overall unit yield could be. We'll also hire, I say environmental consultant, I use this term for another aspect. There's riparian area rights, or you can think of like a tree buffer zone. So obviously trees are very important for cities, and it's become more and more of an active topic. So we need to hire an arborist, or we need to hire a landscape architect to review the environmental area around the site in terms of the green buffer.
Are you using DBAs for that?
We use a lot of different companies for this. And then we'll finally, once we have an architectural concept that we're happy with, we would really like to have the opportunity to meet with the city to show them the concept we're proposing, taking into consideration the environmental factors and the geotechnical, the soils conditions, and then sitting down with them to say, this is what we're looking at proposing, are you supportive of this? And if the city comes back and says yes, and all of the other factors that we've reviewed which affect the overall construction costs or project timeline are considered in our business case or our pro forma as it is, we'll decide whether or not we want to remove subjects on this particular property. If the city provides us with comfort saying, yes, we're willing to support your rezoning, yes, this is the process, this is the timeline that we think it will take, that alleviates a lot of risk for us, and this process generally applies to any development site in any municipality.
Great. We've heard the terms block books or land mapping. Can you explain what that is and how you use it?
Block books and land mapping, a residential real estate term is like farming, or having a farm or a sphere of influence or whatever the case is. And again, I'm a realtor. I've been licensed for 14 years, so some of the terminology I use you might be familiar with or you might not be. A block book is basically, say for example, you look at, I'm just trying to think of the best Surrey example. Say you look at the Fleetwood land use plan. There's a new plan that the city of Surrey has implemented 2015, 2016 that has an entire area map that's outlined. And if you're not familiar with what a land use plan is, if you go on the city website, and or AUTOPROP, yes. I would recommend you use AUTOPROP. It's a lot easier than going on the city website. If you go on the city website and you actually pull up the land use plan, it'll show you all of the properties delineated and what their designations are and their color coded. But that's what the city envisions for the neighborhood in, say, 15 or 20 years. So if you're creating a block book, what you would do is you take the land use map, and then you would, what I did before there was AUTOPROP and before there was Google Earth and there was all this great technology, because I was using MLS when they actually had Bandat. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Bandat, but it is kind of ages myself. I actually look really young, which is great.
You do?
Yeah, thank you. So I used MLS when they had Bandat, and I used MLS before they had Google Street View and Google Earth. So when I was doing block books back then, I would physically walk down the entire block with a camera, and then I would use Bandat and I'd pull all the tax records, and then I had to independently pull all of the owner information through BC Online, which it was before, and now they've converted it to my LTSA. So I just remember doing this in the summer, coming back to the office, because I was working at CB Richard Ellis for a bit too. I just remember coming back to the office, and then I was so sunburned after a full day of walking around, and my lips actually got sunburned, which I was surprised by. I didn't know that was possible. So when you're creating a block book, it's a book that's about this thick, and you identify every single block, and then you have all the owner information. And then back then it was a lot easier to pull a person's phone number because privacy legislation was a lot more lax back then. But that was the process that I would have gone through to create a block book. More recently, using AUTOPROP, you can use the software to pull up a land use plan, and then just very quickly plug and play or click, 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 click through, and then it'll just export all of that data a lot simpler. And it also gives you the ability to create that blockbook format.
And keeps your lips unsunburned.
Yeah. So it's just a lot easier of a process to pull the information. And then the only thing I'll touch on as well, if you're not necessarily using AUTOPROP for land assembly, because again, I speak from a realtor perspective too, if you're farming an area, you can click on that entire neighborhood, you can pull all the information up very quickly, and you can see who owns what properties sold and how much they sold for. So it very quickly gives you a full market synopsis of an entire neighborhood, but it gives you the relevant and accurate, timely data immediately versus having to do it independently.
Great, that covered my last question, which was how do you use AUTOPROP in your daily workflow? So you've covered that, and you've also covered what was it like before AUTOPROP, so well played, Troy. Assessed values, how do these play in? How should one anchor land pricing against assessments?
So assessed values can be a little bit tricky, and what I mean by this is that it's more to do with the improvement value versus the land value of the property. So if land assembly is say $10 million, and you have 5 homes, and one home has a brand new house on it, or a newer home, a developer who's buying a site is looking at it from a price per buildable square foot basis. So they're saying, well, I'm going to tear everything down, I'm going to build an apartment here. Or I'm going to tear everything down, I'll build a house, or whatever the case is. But that one particular homeowner who recently bought and say built their custom dream home obviously has a different perception of value than the other owners who maybe own ranchers or bungalows or older homes that are maybe 40, 50, 60 years old. So when you're factoring in assessed values, or you're factoring the value of the improvements versus the value of the assembly, again, this is like stats 101 or business math 101 per se. You could argue that you could take all of the assessments globally, and then you could say that the price point is $10 million, and then you could apply that blanket over the total assessed values of the property, which would at least aggregate to something. Alternatively, what you can do, another way I've seen this taking place, you look at it on a land foot or a per buildable basis. So some lots might be bigger than others, so you can try and aggregate the value of the assembly based on the total size of the properties versus what you can build on it, and then on a price per buildable square foot, you can say, because you have a 33 wide lot, it's 122 deep, 4,026 square feet, times 2.65 FSR gives you whatever the math is. I can't do it all up here. I need Excel for that. If somebody else's lot is 40 by 122, it's obviously larger. When you do the math on it, it's a little bit bigger, you pay more. Or alternatively, you just have to go in there and you have to try offers on all the lots on a, at least this is what Pucci does. We'll try offers on all the lots on a blanket price per buildable, and then we tell the owner, you obviously know better than we do what you think your home is worth, so why don't you counter on price and tell us what you think it's worth. The homeowners who own the bungalows that are going to be torn down, or the older improvements, are probably going to look at the price and say, hey, this is pretty good because it's more than my assessed value, which is based on single family, the current zone use. And then the owner who has the home that's newer is probably going to try and push up the price, which in my opinion would make sense. And then you just try and negotiate within that price point.
That's great. All right, so that concludes the first part of our Q&A, and that's going to lead us into a quick demo on how AUTOPROP can help you with that block booking that we talked about there. So my colleague Yu is back there in the tech cave, and what we have here is our platform, okay? And what I was talking about before is that we stream all the data from all the municipalities. So you have a platform here that has all the OCP designations over the entire Lower Mainland. So what we're going to do in this instance is we're going to go into a township of Langley, and we'll just wait for the Wi-Fi to do its thing. We're going to look for a potential townhouse site here that we're going to assemble. Alrighty, so we'll get over there eventually. And what we can do is we'll activate the OCP. What we can also do is AUTOPROP streams in all the development activity in the area, so we can actually tell you which parts of the map you want to avoid assembling, because they've already been done, they've already been applied for. And when we get in here, I'll show you that. Just wait for the map tiles to load. so when I click that OCP, it lays a nice green layer over the map. And now I have all the designations that I can look at. So yeah, we're going to look around here, we're going to look for, it tells you exactly what it is. You can actually link to the document there, so it links you straight to that Brookswood Fernwidge document. And you can read up all about the density. So this townhouse site here allows for 35 to 54 units per hectare. So that's where we're going to start doing our database and our block booking. So if my assistant goes in there, we can also activate the development activities. So this allows you to see where you want to probably avoid assembling land, but also allows you to get a really good feel of what's being applied for in the area. So when you click on that blue box in there, that actually tells you that it's been applied by this architect on the behalf of a developer, and it's for 90 townhouse units, okay? So you can see the lot size there, kind of assess how your assembly fits in, and you just get a really great idea of what's possible, and where you can kind of base your initial performance. All right, now let's go start selecting some properties in here. So, the beauty of AUTOPROP is you can select all these properties at once. So we've just selected 6 properties there, and where the true power of our software comes in is we can load data on all these properties at one time. So when we click load data, the things Troy was talking about that they really pay attention to is lot size, the sales history, so you know when they've last sold, but the year constructed as well, so you know where the new builds are in that assembly. We can also get those assessed values for you. So you can start to do your analysis, and to make the prospecting easier, we get you the first name on title for free, and we get you a 411 landline telephone number as well. So when we click load data, that builds up this spreadsheet or block book. And we just created a quick little database that you can use to go door knocking, cold calling, whatever you need to do to generate business, and you know, hopefully get this land assembly on its way. Yeah, so I've got all those details now, and what we actually do, which is really nice, is we can put this all in Excel automatically for you. So if you go up to the Action tab at the top, another feature here actually that you just pointed out to me is that, now this didn't appear on the development applications, but when I do load data on these properties, I now find that G6 Ventures has actually purchased these properties. So again, a nice little hint there that those have already been assembled, and something that I probably just wouldn't waste my time on. Again, know more and work faster. So now we'll just export this to Excel. And a little bit of magic. We've got an Excel spreadsheet with all the information in it. A little life hack here, if you click the corner tile and double click in between the columns, you just open everything up. All right, so that's how AUTOPROP would help with your acquisition process and doing a little bit of prospecting for you, generating business. Okie dokie. The next part of our presentation here is back to the Q&A with Troy. And it's, what do you want a realtor or land assembler to bring you? And Troy, the first question I have for you here, what are some of the, I think you've already gone over a little bit of this, but we might just revisit it. So what are some initial components of your due diligence list?
As I was mentioning earlier, price point, price per buildable, and price per door is helpful. Those are market indicators that when a developer is looking at a site, a lot of the commercial realtors that will give us a call will say, oh, I have a site in Gravity Woodlands, or I have a site in Surrey, Fleetwood, or Langley, or whatever the case is. Here's how much it is per buildable, or here's how much it is per door. If it's within the buildable or the per door price threshold that we think is market or we think is reasonable, we're willing to pay, then obviously ask the next question when you send me all the details and what type of terms are the sellers looking for, how much time are they willing to give, etc. Because those are the next level steps that's the information we need in terms of being able to make an offer. I'm also curious to know if other offers have been made, if the deal's fallen apart, what the reasons why the deal may have fallen apart previously may be, how many other developers are talking to about this. A lot of commercial realtors like to work with a handful of developers or a handful of investors or buyers because they'll respond quickly. Bucci is very good at responding to realtors fairly quickly in terms of a yes or no if the site makes sense to them. So those are some of the things that we'll consider. And then the due diligence process I had outlined earlier with the soils and the environmental, etc., that applies to during the due diligence process.
Correct me if I'm wrong, we look at servicing to the area as well?
Yeah, servicing is important. So we'll hire a civil engineer and they'll do a high-level review of what this servicing cost will be for potential development. But if you're working in a neighborhood that already has older single-family homes, you can assume that there are storm, sanitary, gas, easy hydro, all of those services probably at lot line. They're just undersized for a larger development. But if you're working in a neighborhood, for example, and this is something that you may need to look into hypothetically, if you're working on a new neighborhood in Langley and the site, the neighborhood is kind of on a hillside, there might not be enough adequate water pressure to service those properties. So if you don't ask those questions, or if the developer doesn't ask those questions, those sites, even though they're going through a neighborhood concept plan, might be undevelopable for a number of years because there's not enough adequate infrastructure for the city to provide in order to service those lots at a certain point.
Again, something that AUTOPROP can bring into your report is the infrastructure to the property, so it's a good time saver. How can a realtor best manage expectations with their sellers? What should they prime them for?
So my recommendation would be, if you're working on the land assembly and you want to be successful at selling it to a development company or an investor, whoever your buyer might be, taking the time to educate your sellers on what the development process is and how long it takes, and at the same time walking them through what a development offer might look like, I think is extremely helpful. And the reason why I suggest this process is because a lot of these owners are used to selling, say, the single-family homes, or if it's an acreage or a farm, or whatever the case, the asset type is, they're used to a certain type of transaction style, and commercial realtors or land assembly realtors are trying to sell to developers. And developers have their own language, and they have their own cues, and they have their own way of doing business. So if you educate your sellers in advance and walk them through what the process will be, it's going to save you a lot of heartburn and heartache when you're negotiating the deal on behalf of developers and or investors, and at the same time, it's going to make the deal go a lot smoother with your developer client or your investor client, because then you'll be able to say, my client is fine with 90 days due diligence, or my client is fine with a 1-year close or a 6-month close. Because one of the most challenging things I find, and I'll just give you a high-level example of how some commercial realtors operate. They'll meet with an owner and they'll say, how much do you want for your property? And the owner will make up a number. And it could be market, and it could be 30% higher than market or 50% higher than market. I'm sure some of you have seen this. And that realtor will take the listing and put it on MLS because they just want the listing. And then you are prospecting for developers. You have a couple of developer clients that you're interested in working with, and you call the realtor and you ask them, well, what is the price? And the realtor will say, I don't know. The listing price is X millions of dollars because that's what my seller wants to get. I don't know what they'll accept, but try your best offer. Right? This is just experiences I've had dealing with some realtors who have a certain philosophy of listing properties and selling them. And then you say, okay, great. What kind of terms are they looking for? If they're asking for a superior price to market, are they willing to give time? The realtor says no. And then are they willing to give time for closing? No. They want a single family offer. You have 7 days due diligence and you have 30 days close. That is one of the most difficult things you can digest as a developer, because you can't get anything done in 7 days. And at the same time, if you're closing in 30 days, it's hard to get commercial financing on a development site or on a large land assembly. Because land financing right now in this market is very hard to get. So it's just some of the things that I've noticed.
That's good. Okay, the next one here. What are some of the hardest pieces to communicate or present to you guys? What don't you see and what do you want to see more of?
Suggested price and terms, that would be, as I was all before, outlining the overall price for this site, the overall price for all of the lots, I think is useful. The proposed density that you can achieve. If there's been any due diligence work done on the site ahead of time, so for example, if there's an environmental report available or a geotech report available, I think outlining that in your email is helpful, just saying this is what due diligence has been done. If there's any communication with the city, as a realtor, you're more than welcome. The cities are very, very helpful actually to send an email and say I have a client and they're interested in selling their property. I think it has a higher and a better use. Can you please elaborate on that and tell me a little bit about the process? I think taking the time to do that and then providing it to a developer will not only show them that you're a professional in the way that you're trying to handle the land assembly, but it'll alleviate some of the stress on the developer, and it'll help you reduce the due diligence time frame that the developer actually might need. So it's a benefit to your seller to do that, or to your sellers to do that. So just providing a high-level synopsis, and like I said before, educating your sellers as to what a typical development or a typical investor offer looks like. Because at the end of the day, if you take the listing and you're going to be dealing in commercial real estate per se, but your sellers expect a residential type of offer, it's really going to hinder or hurt the process of establishing relationships with developers so that they trust you and they want to work with you. And at the same time, you're setting yourselves up for trouble coming down the line when you present a development offer to a seller and they say, well, I don't want a 30-day subject or a 90-day subject. I want 7 days and I want to close in 1 month because where am I going to move to? How am I going to get the money, etc. Right? So those are just some things to consider.
How far in the process do you expect a broker to take the deal?
Developers, all developers are a little bit different, and all developers' acquisition departments or similar arms within the company operate a little bit differently. Our philosophy internally is a broker brings us the deal, they give us the high-level information, we do a very quick pro forma on the site, and if we're interested, if we think it makes sense, we'll turn around an offer, and we will draft the paperwork ourselves. Some realtors prefer drafting their own paperwork. We like to do the paperwork using the standard realtor contract with a modified addendum because it's what residential sellers are used to, so it helps the realtors who are involved in the land assembly present the information in an easier format. Some developers will use their own lawyer-written contract, which can be quite difficult for unsophisticated sellers to understand. So that's one of the processes that we take. At the same time, because Gucci Developments is a licensed brokerage, we're very familiar with working with realtors and cooperating with realtors. So just to give you an example, a realtor will call me or a realtor will send me an email saying I have a $10 million land assembly. I say, great, we're interested. We're going to write an offer, we'll get back to you on this date. We write the offer for them. The first thing we say is, you get to double end it. We do not want, we're not in the business to make a commission on doing a deal with you because we're developers. We're not actively engaged in real estate services. We just have the brokerage so that we have access to MLS. So if a realtor brings us a deal, we say, well, you can double end it. We'll do all the paperwork for you. We'll do all the subject removals, and we'll take care of all the rest. Your job to try and sell us the best you can to the sellers in order for us to get hopefully an accepted deal, and so you can remove the subject to land assembly clause, and then we'll work through the due diligence. We will provide you with a full report of basically where we're at and where we're headed halfway through the due diligence period, so that way the homeowners who are under contract know what we've accomplished, what information we've yet to receive, and then at the very end, if we do remove subjects or if we don't remove subjects for whatever reason, we'll provide you with all of the reports that we've done so that it adds value to you if you sell it to another developer. So that's something you should ask for in your contracts, is access to all the due diligence information that the developer concludes, because again, it adds value to your clients in case the deal falls apart. And then we'll provide them with a high-level summary of why we removed subjects or why we didn't. And we try and make the process for the realtors that deal with us as seamless as possible, because it's hard enough to get 6 owners or 10 owners on board to do a land assembly. So if a developer is able to help you streamline that process, we think there's value in that. So that's the approach we take on land assembly.
That's fantastic intel, yeah, that's really good. Okay, on that note, we're going to go into another demonstration. That's how you can kind of bolster AUTOPROP to do a little bit of market analysis and also some due diligence for you. So if we create a report on this one property, this will just combine a bunch of the data sources that you guys would be doing manually into a nice presentable report for you. So the first thing you can see is the Google Street image and the bird's eye view. That might be more applicable to a residential realtor. but still important for the land assembly. And here's the ownership information. So we tie it to LTSA Enterprise, so we can bring you that first name for free. If you do want to pull a full title, we can pull that for you. We can also pull subdivision plans, okay? So you've done your due diligence, you have the surveying drawings for the lot dimensions. We keep going down, 411 return. We can actually do the slope of the property for you too. So you can mark that off your due diligence list by having a little slope calculation. And this is a fusion between Google elevations and eValue. So you can kind of get a little bit of a glimpse into how much relief is on that property. If we keep going down, we pull the Paragon tax report as well, and that's part of our deal with the real estate boards. And then we've done some market analysis for you as well. So this is a search for active and sold listings within a 1 kilometer radius in the last 90 days. So we've automated that Paragon for you. We've actually done quite a bit of legwork in the table as well, because we've averaged out all the list price and sale prices and even done the price per square foot for you. So yeah, it's a nice feature there. You can download full listings if you want as well. And then if we keep going down the market analysis route here, we've got Commercial Edge built into our reports too. So anyone can sign up for this service, and it's really great for finding deals that have gone through on vacant land in the area or office or whatever you're specialized in. But now I have all the comps for vacant land sales in the last 6 months. And all the listings there as well. There's a little bit more due diligence there. There's the GIS snapshots we take. There's an eValue assessment, but this is just an example of some of the stuff that we can do in seconds for you in creating these reports. Great. Another thing that Troy talked about is how you can present this to a developer. We have a great application called IBOM. IBOM is basically it stands for Information Bubble on a Map Builder, so you can build your own maps with information in them. What it's really great for is presenting land assemblies, and we're going to show you one now, if it loads. And so this is great because Troy was talking about presenting the density that's possible in an area. He was talking about presenting the lot sizes. And so what we have here is we have all those properties, and in these information bubbles, if you can see them, we've got a bunch of information. And that's what the name means. So you've got the lot sizes, you've got the assessed values, you've got the OCP designation there with the density in it. You can build in whatever notes you want. Like I said, this is a blank canvas. Whatever you can imagine you want to put on your properties, you can input on this map and present it to a developer and help facilitate a deal. The color coding that you see here is just kind of a nice visual cue that you can present to your developer. So if I'm presenting this to Troy, I want him to know which properties I have exclusive listings on. And so I've just visually cued him to those green properties that I have obtained exclusive listings on, and the orange one there is just pending, so that's just waited a little bit more approval, but just an example of what we can mark on the map and how we can kind of visually cue the developer into that deal. Great. Okay, with that, we're going to get into some Q&A. And I'm going to start it off. We're just going to alternate here. I'll ask one question, and then we'll open it up to the floor. The first one I have here is, Troy, you've already answered the commission breakdown there, but I think you've kind of answered the subjects as well. We'll start with this one. What subjects are common in a developer acquisition offer?
Subject to assembly is one of my favorite clauses, because at the end of the day, the sellers will take or can take quite a while in order to all agree to sell at any given time. So you could expect maybe a subject to assembly clause for 30 days if there are some owners that are taking a little bit longer to cross the finish line and turn to an assembly deal. Subject to due diligence is another one of my favorite clauses because it gives the developer the ability to figure out what they can do on the site. Sometimes, and not always, depending on how difficult an area is to work in or how long it could take, a developer may ask subject to first reading or subject to second reading or subject to third reading. Those are typical in areas which is in a new neighborhood concept plan. Another subject I'll just mention quickly that is becoming more and more common is developers who are investors or that are going into a new neighborhood area that is yet to be approved will do a subject to the city council approving the actual neighborhood concept plan. If you are going to use clauses like these, make sure that you have an outside date for each of the clauses, because if you just write subject to first reading or subject to second reading in the contract, and you don't have a date when those subjects will expire, is considered an ambiguous clause, and the contract could be unenforceable if the seller's and this isn't legal 101, but I'm just throwing it out there that developers may ask for those type of clauses, but make sure that you have outside dates on them, but those are typical clauses that we'll see.
That's great. We'll open up to the floor now, so does anyone have any questions for Troy here? We'll go at the back there.
I want to ask if the land was sold as rental buildings, will it affect the revenue for it?
If the land was sold as a rental building, will it affect the land value of the assembly?
Are you talking about like a strata wind up? Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm talking about the new city planning. So some of the building they will say this is 18 stories, but some others they say these will be rental buildings in the future. So my question is to ask you, with your experience, will it affect the assembly value in those houses, existing houses on that site?
Yes, it can. So I'll try and answer that question in two ways. Some properties are zoned specifically for rental use, depending on what the density is to be achieved on the site. So for example, in Vancouver, there are certain properties that are only allowed for rental housing stock. So those assemblies will have an impacted value because for developers who want to provide for market housing, which sells for a lot more, on a per square foot basis than a rental building, which you might sell to a pension fund, the overall values differ. So if, obviously as a developer you can achieve a more profitable program or a profitable housing type on property, that's going to translate into the land value. So from a rental perspective versus say selling for market housing, the market housing price will always be higher than the rental value. The only way to truly find out what those values are in a certain market, you can try and look, using AUTOPROP, you can try and look at comparable transactions. So if you know which properties are potentially going to sell and they have a rental designation associated with them, if you pull up AUTOPROP and then you look at the sales history, if you know what the density is that you can achieve on the site, so say it's a 6-story apartment building, it says 2.65 FSR, and you compare that versus market housing versus rental housing, you can look at what the land prices that are being paid, if you can find land transactions that are of a similar date, and then if you just do the math backwards, you'll be able to say, hey, this sold for, say, $1 million for the rental property, that sold for $1.5 million for a non-rental property, but with the same zoning type, so that'll kind of give you the difference in terms of price point as to what one will trade for versus another.
That's great, okay. So find those comparables you're saying there. Rezoning, how long is the wait for approval if it's not in the OCP?
That's a really good question. Some cities work a lot faster than others.
Which cities?
Langley's timelines are a lot shorter than Surrey, and Surrey's timelines are a lot shorter than Burnaby, and Burnaby's timelines are a lot shorter than Vancouver. So it just really depends relative to where you're looking. So for example, in Surrey, on any rezoning application, it can be about 12 to 14 months. But then as a developer, you have to factor in the development permit timeline and your building permit timeline. Because at the end of the day, you want to be able to get it to the ground to start construction, because you don't get paid or you don't cash out on the project until after you finish selling it. Surrey's timelines are quite reasonable in comparison to a lot of Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. Langley is a lot faster in terms of their timeline. It can be 8 months to 12 months to get everything done. The district of the city, they're actually pretty good to work in. I think Chilliwack and Abbotsford are a little bit faster than Surrey as well from a Fraser Valley perspective. And then when you look into Vancouver and Burnaby, just for comparison's sake, we recently met with the city of Vancouver and they were telling us it would be about 30 to 33 months to get a rezoning development building permit done. But in Surrey, it was about 16 to 18 months. So it just gives you an example of how long it's taken in different municipalities.
So it's slow.
No matter what, it's slow, unfortunately.
Anyone from the floor? Yes.
So what's a typical, you said to prepare your sellers, what are like typical length of time for subjects and closing?
What are typical lengths of times for subjects and closing with the seller?
Every developer, the first line of questioning will probably be I'd like to get 90 days or 120 days, which could be a reasonable time frame depending on how long and where the NCP process is at. So for example, can be phase 3, and then this is in Vancouver, because it wasn't approved yet at the time, a lot of developers or speculators were going in there making an offer subject to the city approval for the council plan, and then they were doing another subject that was subject to a rezoning application within a certain time frame. So they like to stagger it based on development milestones. So in areas where the neighborhood concept plan is yet to be approved, you can typically see maybe a 4 to a 6 month due diligence period, and that would just include wording subject to assembly, subject to due diligence, and subject to council approval of a certain milestone. In areas that are established, you might see due diligence timelines 30 to 60 days. It's probably more appropriate. That gives the developer time to assemble the properties, work through their studies, their engineering reports, their architectural plans, and have the time to try and sit down with the city planning department, the city engineering department, to figure out what support they will have or what obstacles may come up. And it's typical, not all development, I guess, acquisitions. If the city comes back with major obstacles, developers may approach you as a realtor and say, listen, there's an issue with the water pressure, as I had suggested, or there's issues with soils. We estimated that there was no soils issues on the site, or we estimated that the timeline for development was X number of months. We need the seller to reduce their price in order to proceed with the deal. So that's something that can come up as well. But again, if you mention all of this upfront to your sellers in advance, and you create a negotiation strategy that you think works best for your sellers, you'll prepare them. But those are some of the typical clauses and some of the typical timelines you'll see.
Great. How should I choose which developer to bring my site to first? And how can one evaluate the stability of a development company?
Well, I have business cards. Just to plug the company for a minute, if you want to bring us sites, we will definitely look at them. But I think really it comes down to the developers that are working in the neighborhood. I think it's helpful to think of them first. So for example, if you're looking in Surrey City Centre at sites, and there's Concord Pacific, there's Boza, and there's a number of other very large developers who are working in the area. They might have maximized their exposure in that particular market, so they might not want to purchase another site, but you know they're active buyers. So logic, from my perspective, my logic would dictate if I was a land realtor, I would call Boza and I would call Concord Pacific, and I would call all the developers that are working in that area that are doing the tower sites, if you're doing a tower site. At the same time, I might look in other municipalities, so I might look in Langley, and I might look in other areas that are similar and figure out who those developers are and contact them. Because if you're selling a certain type of property with a certain zoning type, you want to make sure you bring it to the right developer who has the appetite for that site. I think it's really important. You'll spin your wheels if you're trying to bring a high-rise site to a low-rise builder, a townhouse builder, or a mid-rise builder. And vice versa, you could always take a look at the active development applications in the particular municipality, which you can get the information from AUTOPROP or from the City of Surrey website if it was Surrey per se. And then you can contact those companies as well. So those are some ways that you can look at trying to find potential buyers for the right product type. And then on the flip side, if you don't want to do that, because some people will say, oh hey, I'd rather just bring it to the biggest players in town. The Business in Vancouver has a report that comes out every year, and it outlines who all the top multifamily builders are based on product and based on the locations they work. So that's also a very good list that will provide you with information about who's who in the development world and where they're working. You can use that as well.
We actually linked all the Surrey development applications there, so you can see who's actually applied for them. So, yeah, plug for plug.
Yeah.
Anyone out here? Yeah, sir.
I would know how you would like to work with investors. Those people have money to buy land. They think this land will be resolved. In the OCP plan, they want to buy land, but they are not builders. They are not developers. What do you like to work with those investors?
Question is, how do you work with investors, and how does that process get facilitated with the development company?
Well, and I'm going to say this, and take this with a grain of salt. Investors have a very, very different, criteria for selling their property. They're not emotionally invested. They're taking their money, they're putting it into a property, they're basically buying land and waiting, and when the right buyer comes along, they'll sell. So there's a limited amount of emotion that goes in when an investor is buying a property and when an investor is selling the property. Whereas if you're dealing with single-family homeowners, you're dealing with maybe it's an acreage in Surrey or Langley per se, and the family has lived there for many, many years. The transaction type and the way that the deal will take place and the negotiation will take place are two totally different negotiation types. What I mean by that is an investor will look into a neighborhood and they'll have an investment horizon or an investment criteria. So they'll say, I want to pay this much per per acre of land, or I want to pay this much per door, or whatever the case is, and I'm willing to buy and wait. And when I get out of this opportunity, I want to hit. So I'll just use some dollars and cents examples. I want to buy for, say, $1.5 million an acre in Surrey, in a certain neighborhood. But I'm only going to transact within a 3 to 5 year time frame, but I want to sell it for $3 million an acre. So I want to basically double what I've paid, less holding costs and less property transfer tax and all those wonderful things. So if a developer comes along and offers them a price that's similar to that, they'll probably sell it. If their target isn't met, they'll probably just sit on the land and continue waiting. So if you're working with investors, the main question is similar to dealing with the developer. The main questions you want to ask are, where are you looking to buy property? How much are you willing to pay? What is your investment tolerance or your investment risk? And what is your horizon between the buy and when you sell? And then the last thing I'd recommend as a realtor is, as a lot of realtors like to ask for the list back. So if you're going to put the investor into that property, you probably want to be the realtor who's going to sell it at the end of the day, because then at least you're queuing up the opportunity in the near future when they do decide to sell.
Brilliant. What's the general price per door for raw land in the various lower mainland areas?
I prefer to go with price per buildable, just because price per door I think is a harder range to gauge, because it's statistically inaccurate depending on the size of the units, etc. So I was chatting with a developer friend of mine recently, and he said he picked up an apartment site in city center, and I was actually surprised by this, for about $52,000 a door on apartments with a second or third reading in city center recently. I thought that the price per door for apartments in city center was more like, so I'm going to go per door and then I'll go per buildable square foot, just to show you how it's skewed. I thought that the price per door was more about $70,000 per door, so it just gives you an idea of the difference, but again, the units were much smaller. On a per buildable square foot basis in Surrey, there are some deals that are trading at $30 to $50 a buildable square foot, and there are some deals that are trading for $50 to $150 a square foot per buildable in city center, based on the land pricing, and also based on the saleable price for development sites. So for example, you look at Vancouver. I'll just give you just two different market averages. In the west side of Vancouver, sites are trading for $500 to $800 a buildable square foot, whereas they are a fraction of that in Surrey, so that's why a lot of people are very interested in Surrey and Langley as well. On the east side of Vancouver, sites are selling for $200 to $300 a buildable. And again, that makes Surrey look like a bargain. So if you're looking at land values, whether it be in Surrey or Langley, Chilliwack, Abbotsford, or wherever in the Fraser Valley you're working in, again, I reiterate the fact that the best thing to do is to look at the recent sales, to do a data analysis and figure out who the players are and what they're paying for the sites. Because again, as realtors, we're trained that we're supposed to do a comparative market analysis. So if we're trying to dabble in land, we want to make sure that We know what the prices are, either contract prices or closing prices. So you have to do an appropriate CMA. And if the CMA is outside of your expertise at this point, I would encourage you to talk to an appraiser, or I'd encourage you to talk to another professional that has ideas of value, because that at least can provide you with information that'll put you in the right direction. But on a price per buildable basis, in Langley, it's even less than Surrey. You can get sites out there for $20 a buildable, $50 a buildable, $60 a buildable for the higher density sites. So you have to look at your main metropolitan area, in this case being Surrey City Centre, and then the further you work out of that, the less per buildable square foot, just based on the end unit prices and what the developers are paying for those sites in those particular markets.
And there is a app you can bring into AUTOPROP there that does show you all the price per square foot of new developments as well. So yes, sir.
Yes. So question to AUTOPROP.
Yes.
You're dealing with the OCP, NCP, and is that you're also dealing with upcoming NCP, like first reading, second reading?
Yeah, we do map portions of the local area plans and things that are under amendment approval. We do have those. We just link you to the documents, so you do have to read up on the documents, but we do link you to some of those documents. Absolutely. We can launch into another one from the crowd here.
Question for
Oh, just behind you. Sorry, sir.
I was just wondering, in pro forma, what would be the profit margin that the developer calculates?
Typically, developers are looking to try and make about 15 to 20 or 20 to 25% return on cost, but that overall amount is based on I don't know if you're familiar with the term internal rate of return. So it's basically the time value of money over the investment horizon. Cash in versus cash out, and cash out for you is when you sell the last unit. So it could be 20% give or take. That's what it was a few years ago, but then the margins start to get squeezed based on increases in construction costs, difficulty with labor, increased timelines in terms of financing requirements, because the rezoning or the development building permit is taking a lot longer. So it's about I'd say give or take about a 20% average over a 3 to 5 year horizon is what a developer is looking to achieve.
20 over 3 to 4 years?
Yeah, but that's 20% global. That's not 20% per year. Because if it was, there'd be a lot more retired developers.
My question: how is the assembly packaged for sale legally? 5 separate listings, 5 separate offers, or somehow combined?
You are dealing with most likely independent sellers, so maybe couples, families, investors. Other developers who failed to assemble the site in the first place and they weren't able to get all the lots in an assembly. So there's a variety of seller types, but you have to list the properties separately. Whether you use an MLS contract or an exclusive listing, that's ultimately your choice. And then obviously all of the offers that come out from developers will be independent offers on each property. So technically, if it was a 5-lot assembly, it'd be 5 listings and it would be 5 independent contracts, purchase contracts negotiated separately. But what I've seen is that the contracts will come in and the realtor will have all 5 sellers in the room. They'll do it at a community center, whatever the case is, or they'll do it at somebody's house, and they'll see all of the prices are the same. Everyone is, even though it's confidential information, we're providing this to you just to know that the developer is being reasonable with the price points. They're not independently negotiating. So that's a tactic that works quite well. But at the end of the day, it's independent listings, independent contracts.
And I'll just move that on to, and how is the total acquisition price of the site divided up? Is it equal across all sellers all the time, or does that change as well?
I think it really depends on the buyer and what their negotiation strategy is, and or the seller and the seller or sellers and what their negotiation strategy is as well. And what I mean by that is sometimes there will be a block of properties and there will be one person who is a spokesperson for the entire block. And this spokesperson has 2 faces. The spokesperson is saying, I would like, or we would like to get this much money for the entire assembly. But if they're the one who's acting on behalf of the owners, and I'm just saying this like generally, if somebody is representing all of the owners on an assembly, I'm sure that when you talk to particular owners in your business, or particular sellers, somebody might say, I want more money than others. This happens all the time in the business world. And so the person who does a lot of the legwork on an assembly, who's a spokesperson, may say, well, because I'm dealing with you direct, Mr. or Mrs. Realtor, I want to get the best deal. I want to be the last person who negotiates, kind of thing. So there's that type of a situation that could arise. I think a good developer will bring an offer that's fair to all parties and want to negotiate all the sites at the same time. And there's no good and bad in this. There's no like good or evil. It's just everyone has a different negotiation strategy. And then on the flip side, there's another acquisition strategy where somebody tries to buy a lot on the corner or a lot in the middle. And this is the investor developer who comes in and tries to get a wonderful deal, and then they will then branch out because they've got the property in the middle tied up and say, or the property in the corner tied up and say, I bought it for this much, this is what I paid, therefore I think all of the properties on this block are worth this much. And if you don't participate in the assembly with me because I am already an owner and one of your neighbors now, I'm just never going to sell my property and you guys are hooped. So work with me because you have no other choice. That's another way of how assemblies are handled. I don't particularly like that approach, but every investor has their own strategy, or every developer has their own strategy. I see this quite a bit. Just for general interest, one other strategy I've seen implemented now is that some developers are actually buying the minimum number of condominium units and condo buildings, because you're probably familiar with strata windups now. So some developers are saying, hey, we can get in on this condo building and buy X number of percentage of the units. So then that way, no matter what, if this building goes up in value, when the strata does wind up, they can't sell. And the courts can't compel us to participate in the sale because we have this many votes. Therefore, we can hold the value or suppress the value down on the condos. So there's, again, a lot of different ways that these types of deals are being done. At the end of the day, we at Gucci take the approach that if you come up with an offer that's fair to everyone, it's probably going to get you across the finish line a lot sooner than negotiating individually with all the owners. Because if you negotiate individually with all the owners, the assembly that you're working on can take you 6 to 12 months. Whereas if all the sellers come together and they're willing to take a reasonable offer, it'll cut the time down probably in half and save you a lot of heartache and argument.
At the back there, yes, sir. Yeah, you.
Myself?
Yep.
So as a realtor, both in terms of process, let's say there's a property and you want to sort of land assembly. Do you start knocking on doors? Do you do your due diligence, see what the neighborhood concept plan is? Like, what is the best process in terms of the first few steps?
The question is, how do you start the land assembly process? What's a step-to-step approach to that?
That's top secret. I'm just kidding. It just depends on your style of prospecting. Some individuals have established relationships already in certain neighborhoods because they've been working in them for a very long time. So if that's the case, and that's you already have an entrenched relationship with a certain neighborhood, then it's a lot easier for you to be that familiar face who maybe is a residential realtor who's trying to transition into land assembly. So, if you door knock, or if you have, coffees with the neighbors, or you do, I don't know how popular this is anymore, but neighborhood barbecues, or you do movie days, or whatever the case is that some of these realtors do. That's helpful because a lot of the neighborhoods that were existing, and people may have been working in them for 10, 15, 20 years, if that neighborhood goes through a neighborhood concept plan and it's going to get redeveloped, I mean, if I was that residential realtor, I would want to be the face of that neighborhood in terms of trying to get the assemblies, because they've dealt with me. I've, say, sold them a home or helped them sell in the past. So I would really try and work my network in that neighborhood if it's a new neighborhood that's going through a plan. So that's one option. Another option is you door knock, you send out letters, you try and get phone numbers through 411 or through AUTOPROP, so to speak, if it's a newer neighborhood that you're working in, and you basically use the same type of realtor techniques you would to get the single family or the condo listings. You apply that to land assemblies, but you have a land assembly specific letter or a land assembly specific dialogue that you engage in. That's another option. And then, say last but not least, if you have buyers that are interested in working in, and this is probably one of the best ways of doing it, if you have buyers who are interested in making a lot of offers in a neighborhood, and you are going out there and writing these offers on behalf of your developer or your buyer to try and assemble sites, I think not only will that give you instant credibility with the neighbors in the neighborhood that you're actually bringing them offers, whether or not they decide to sell their home, they're going to say, hey, this realtor not only said that they were willing to try and help sell my property, my assembly, but they brought me an offer, so I'm going to think of them first, because a lot of residential realtors might not have enough commercial experience. And again, there's two approaches to taking listings in land assembly. One approach is whatever the sellers say, I'll list for that, and I'll just put it on MLS. And the property probably won't sell for that unless the market goes up another 20, 30, 50%. And then the other option, or the other way of doing it is to say, I brought you an offer, it might not have met your expectations now, you might not be interested in selling now, but in 3 to 6, 9 months a year, when you are thinking of selling, please think of me first, because the market may have moved, I can try and bring you a better offer at the time, and why not try listing your home with me? So those are some of the ways that you might try to put together a package of land assembly, and the most important thing is generating trust with the sellers that you're capable and competent to do this type of deal.
What's the best way to identify a lead seller? So to convince 10, you need to first convince 1.
If you send, for example, if you send out letters, typically the lead, and it goes to that entire block, typically the lead seller will call you back and say, hey, my block is for sale. One of the most interesting assemblies I've seen, which actually kind of makes me laugh, it's kind of a funny one. The assembly came up on Craigslist, of all places. There was a 10-lot assembly in Vancouver, and somebody, for some reason, I guess, was fed up with all the realtors who were contacting them trying to sell this assembly. So they just said, hey, I'm going to go on Craigslist, and under the sales section, under real estate, they just wrote block for sale. Contact me for information, or contact me for details. The problem with that assembly, which is kind of sad, is that only one realtor responded to the Craigslist ad. Only one buyer was brought into that assembly, and those lots are under contract for a few $100,000 below what I think market is for that property. So that's why being a realtor with the expert knowledge, at least puts you in a position where if you're working on a land assembly, you could probably win, you probably win the trust of the sellers to say, hey, I've done this land assembly, or I presented these offers on behalf of the developer. I think that's what sellers want to see. I think if you're just taking a single family or condominium or residential style approach to selling land assemblies, you could get into trouble. And the last or the worst thing you want to have happen is dissatisfied sellers because you didn't do a proper CMA, which you're required to as a realtor in order to sell these things.
We'll go at the back there. Yeah, you know.
2 things. How's the Forgotten City of Delta doing right now?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
How's the Forgotten City of Delta doing right now? Like, nobody ever mentions Delta. It's hard to do projects in Delta, things like that. That's my first, and then my second is coaching buyers. Is it more attractive to you if it's under a clean shell company, so you can just buy the company itself? That's my second question.
So first, from an AUTOPROP perspective, we're actually looking to get the OCP of Delta online very soon. We're looking at purchasing off the corporation, because they're a private data entity. So we're going to get that online soon. They do have land use plans out there. We're going to hopefully get that on very, very soon. So.
I think from a Delta perspective, Delta Rise is a decent example of a high-rise project that is under development. I can't recall if it's sold out yet or if it's almost sold out. I think it's Bassey Developments was one of the developers. Okay, somebody's shaking their head in the back.
Somebody else.
It's somebody else. They may be a partner in that project or something along those lines.
Developer from the partners.
They're partners, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's what I'm familiar with the project to the extent that one of my friends who works at Open Marketing was the company that did project marketing for Delta Rise, and then it's a high-rise. It's one of the largest projects ever in Delta, as far as I'm aware. So in order to get a development project off the ground of such a magnitude in a market that hasn't seen development like that, you'll need partners involved, and financing requirements can be quite intensive. Delta has a lot of single-family zoned homes. I do not believe you're allowed to do basements in Delta, with the exception of some areas that have recently approved. But again, I could be wrong about this because I don't know all the details of every market. My head would explode if that was actually the case. But Delta is a market that is very good to look at from the perspective of townhomes and low-rise apartment buildings. I think that's the primary type of development that makes the most sense there. And then if you're looking at mid-rise or high-rise sites, you'd have to look at cues from how Delta Rise performed out there to give you an idea of the development opportunity in that particular municipality. But if a developer's brought a townhouse site or a low-rise apartment site in Delta, I think they would take a look at it. Timelines there for redevelopment are less than Surrey as well. Delta is very interested in seeing some of their areas redeveloped. So it is not a market that I say should be forgotten about. And then on the flip side, on your other question with regards to shell companies, I think if a buyer is going to work with a shell company trying to buy or assemble a development sites, I think there's three things to consider in my opinion. The first thing is, if you're making an offer through a limited company, so say it's BC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't really think that that approach is going to have the best reception from sellers, because if they're seeing it's a limited company making the offer, they might question who is this and what is their background or what is their development background. So if you're working with somebody who wants to buy sites through like a shell company, it's best that it actually has a name. And I know I'm going into maybe a little bit more detail than I should, but I'm just going to give you my 2 cents on it. The second thing is, if you're buying through a shell company, you can do what's called a bare trust sale. So if the realtor purchase of contract state that you're not allowed to flip it, and any profit that is made on an assignment, the sellers are entitled to it. Technically, if you do a bare trust sale, it's a way of getting out of that flip. And I preface this with, I disagree with that approach. I don't think that it's fair to the sellers if you're using that mechanism to try and get around the flip clause in a contract. I think it's wrong. And I think that the government is probably going to provide some form of intervention on that in the next little while when they institute the taxes on speculation. So that's something to watch out for. And finally, there is really no issue with working with a company that is limited, but as a realtor, you need to make sure you're vetting your clients. So if this is a shell company and the directors of the company have no experience in development whatsoever, they're just using a shell company to avoid having to close, or the offer is only as good as the shell company, which is got zero assets, is a bit of a problem. So if you're bringing BC 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 limited company offer, if you're telling your sellers that they're an established developer and they have a lot of experience, and you actually don't know that, and then the sellers find out, they could sue you for misrepresenting the buyer, like the actual buyer, and who the shareholders are. So there's no problem in dealing with this type of a company, but it's just making sure that you're vetting not only the company, but the shareholders who are involved too. Because if I'm a seller, I would want to know this. Or if I find out that you didn't check this, and then you sell me into an offer, and it just comes up, it could be a bit of an issue. So it's just something to watch out for.
Yeah, at the back there.
Another question regarding when we do the performance, so we use streaming metrics to calculate the buildable property, and we use the efficiency to calculate the sellable scope. So what's the typical efficiency rate for that kind of house project, or maybe low-rise project and also high-rise? What's the typical number of efficiency?
So the numbers are buildable for low-rise and high-rises?
No, I'm not talking about buildable, because buildable is also talking about sellable, because there's maybe clubhouse, those common areas. So I mean, there's a number called efficiency. I think did I use the right term? Efficiency?
Yes, you did. With regards, I'll go through the different product types really quickly.
Thanks.
Townhouses typically have 100% efficiency rate because what you build is what you can sell. The only time a townhouse site doesn't have 100% efficiency is if you need to provide an amenity space or an amenity building that you're building out for. So when you're doing your calculations in a pro forma, you would just add a line item under the construction budget for amenity space, and you would throw on your price per buildable on a per square foot cost, whatever your construction costs are, and then you would factor that in. So in that circumstance, a townhouse site wouldn't be 100% efficient, because in some municipalities, for example in Surrey, if it's a townhouse site of a certain size, you must provide an amenity building. You cannot get around that. So you can't say that a townhouse site is 100% efficient if an amenity building is required, so just preface that. If you're looking at an apartment building, whether it be a 4-story, 6-story, 8-story kind of low rise to hitting the mid-rise mark, say good efficiency target is about 85%, but a really good architect could probably get you about to 88% efficiency. I'm working on a site right now, which I'm questioning the efficiency. The architect's telling me the building is going to be 92% efficient, but the hallways are really small. So there's ways to adjust the efficiency as you need if you're trying to increase the rating. And then on a high-rise building, it really depends on what amenities you're providing and what the requirements are, because some municipalities will require you to have a backup generator room and connection point for a district energy system and a variety of other components that you need to install in the building, and that takes up floor area. So on an apartment building, a high-rise building, you might be at maybe 83, 84%, 85% efficient in order to make it work. You could be higher than that depending on what the city requires, but there's give and take.
Great. I think on that note, we'll just end the proceedings there. Before we leave, we do have our sales team back there, and if you like what you've seen with AUTOPROP, you can go ahead and set up a one-to-one demo. We will share screens with you mobilely in Vancouver from anywhere, and we'll show you a little bit more on the software. There's a ton more to it. The second part of, if you're an existing customer, feel free to talk to Justine or myself, and we can book you in for another training if you need to brush up on any of this. And then I think we'll just do a quick draw here, and we'll draw a free 3-month subscription. So if we can bring that bowl of cards out, we'll get Sean.